I have told this story maybe 100 times, to my children when they were small, to their children when they got old enough to sit still, and every time I tell it, somebody asks me the same thing. They ask, were you scared? And I always say yes, but that is not the whole truth. The truth is harder to say out loud. The truth is that I was scared, and underneath the scared I was hopping. Hopping for the one thing I had told myself I was not allowed to want. But let me go back. Let me start where it really started. I came west in the autumn of 1884. I was 22 years old and I came alone, with one trunk and a paper in my coat pocket that I could not bring myself to read again. My father had died that spring. He was a good man and a bad businessman, which is a sad combination, and when they buried him there was almost nothing left. Almost nothing except the debt. That was the thing he left me. A debt to a man named Garrett Pyle. Pyle ran half the valley. He owned the freight line, the general store, two-thirds of the cattle that grazed the low pasture, and a piece of just about everybody who lived there. My father had borrowed against the future the way hopeful men do, and when the future did not arrive, the paper came to me. Pyle could have asked for money. Instead, he asked for me. He sent a letter, very polite, saying that a sensible woman in my position would understand that marriage settled all accounts neatly. He underlined the word neatly. I still remember that. So I went west, not because I wanted to marry him. I went because I had nowhere else, and because I told myself I would find a way out once I was there. That is the kind of lie you tell yourself when you are young and frightened and you need to keep moving. The town was called Ledger Creek. It sat in a high cup of land with mountains on three sides, big gray ones with snow on their shoulders even in September. The air up there was thin and clean and cold in the mornings. The town itself was small. One main street churned to mud when it rained, hard as iron when it froze. A church with a bell that did not ring true. A boarding house where I took a room. And everywhere you looked, the mountains, leaning in close like they wanted to hear what you were saying. I will be honest, the country was beautiful in a way that hurt. I had grown up where the land was flat and tame. Out there the land did not care about you at all, and somehow that was a comfort. The mountains did not want anything from me. Pyle wanted plenty. I met him my second day. He came to the boarding house in a clean coat, smiling, with a gift, a length of blue cloth for a dress. He talked the whole time about how things would be once we were settled. He never asked me a single question, not one. He talked about me the way a man talks about a good horse he is about to buy. I sat very straight in the chair and I smiled and I said the right things, and inside I felt a door closing somewhere far down inside myself. That is how I met the valley. That is how I came to be there. Now I will tell you how I met him, the other one, the one this story is really about. It was 3 days later, on the trail above the creek. I had gone walking to get away from the boarding house. The widow who ran it was kind, but she watched me like she expected me to break, and being watched like that makes you want to break just to be done with it. So I walked. I followed the creek up out of town, past the last fences, into the timber. The trees up there were tall and old, and the light came down between them in long bars full of dust and gnats. It was quiet. I had never heard quiet like that. Back home there was always something. Out there it was just the water and the wind, and my own breathing. I went too far. I knew it and I kept going anyway. And the weather changed the way it does in the mountains, fast and mean. The sky went the color of a bruise. The wind picked up cold off the snow. And then it was snowing in September, big wet flakes that stuck to everything, and the trail I had come up was gone, white and strange, like a stranger had painted over it. I am not ashamed to say I got lost. Anybody would have. I went one way and it was wrong, and I went back and that was wrong too, and the cold started getting into my hands and my feet, and the light started going, and I understood in a calm, clear way that surprised me that I might die up there. 22 years old, run all the way across a country, and I was going to lie down under a tree and not get up. That was when I saw him. He came out of the timber like he was part of it. A big man, broad through the shoulders, in a long coat made of skins and a hat gone soft with weather. He had a beard and pale eyes, and he moved through that snow like it was nothing, like it was a road he knew. He had a rifle slung on his back and he was leading a mule loaded with something, traps maybe or hides. He stopped when he saw me. We just looked at each other for a moment, the snow coming down between us. He did not say a fancy thing. He said, "You are a long way from where you ought to be." I tried to answer and my teeth were chattering so hard I could not. He saw that. He came over and he took off his big coat and put it around my shoulders, and it was warm from his body and it smelled of wood smoke and pine and something animal. And I want you to understand, I had been raised to be afraid of a strange man putting his coat on me in the woods, and I was not afraid. I do not know how to explain that. Some part of me, older than my fear, just knew. His name was Eli Wren. He lived alone up in the high country, trapped and hunted and traded down in town a few times a year. He did not say all that then. He said it later in pieces the way he said everything. Then he just got me walking. He kept his hand at my back and he talked low and steady, not about anything, just talking so I would have something to follow, and he walked me down out of that storm. It took us near 2 hours. By the end, I was leaning on him with most of my weight, and he carried it like it was nothing. He brought me to the edge of town, to the first lit window, and he stopped there. He took his coat back, gentle, and he looked at me with those pale eyes and he said, "You should not go up there alone. The mountain does not forgive being underestimated." And then he was gone, back into the dark and the snow, before I could even thank him properly. I stood there in the lit doorway shaking, and the widow fussed over me, and Pyle was sent for and came and made a great show of being worried, and held my cold hands in his warm ones and said I had given him a fright. And the whole time, all I could think about was a man with snow in his beard who had not asked me a single thing about myself, except whether I was warm enough now. That was the beginning. I did not know it then. You never do. After that, I started finding reasons to go up the creek trail. I told myself it was for the air. I told myself a lot of things, but the truth is I was looking for him, and I think I knew it, and I think that is why I was so careful to lie to myself about it, because I was promised. There was a paper in my coat and a man in a clean coat down in town who talked about me like livestock, and a sensible woman, like Pyle said, would understand. I was not feeling sensible. I found him again maybe a week later. Or he found me, I never was sure which. He was skinning out a deer by the creek and he looked up like he had been expecting me. He did not say much. He never did. But he made room by his fire and I sat, and we did not talk a great deal, and somehow that was the easiest hour I had spent since my father died. It became a thing after that. Not arranged. Nobody said let us meet. I would just go up and he would just be there or come along soon after, and we would sit by the creek or walk and he would show me things. He showed me where the elk crossed and how to read the weather off the high peaks and which berries would feed you and which would kill you. He showed me an eagle's nest in a dead pine, big as a wagon wheel. He talked about the country like it was a person he loved and was a little afraid of. And slowly, in pieces, I learned him. He had come up into the mountains 8 years before. He had lost people, a wife, a child, to fever, all in one bad winter down on the flat, and he had not been able to stay where their graves were. So he went up high where nothing reminded him. He did not tell me this to make me feel sorry. He told it flat, like a fact about the country. But I saw what it cost him to say it, the way his big hands went still. I think that is when I understood that the quiet in him was not emptiness. It was a room with the door closed because of what was behind it. And I think he started to leave that door open a crack for me. Just a crack. He asked me one afternoon why a girl like me had come to a place like this. And I found myself telling him. The debt, the paper, Pyle, all of it. I had not said it out loud to anyone. The widow knew the shape of it but not the truth. And I told this mountain man the whole of it by his fire, and when I was done he was quiet a long time. Then he said, "You do not have to do it." I told him I did. I told him a person pays their debts and I had nothing else to pay with, and that was the world. He looked at me a while. He said, "A debt is money. You are not money. Whatever that man told you, he was lying to himself about which of those two things you are." I have thought about that sentence every day of my life since. But I did not have the courage of it then. I went back down the mountain and the world was still the world. Pyle had set a date. The wedding would be in the spring when the passes opened and his people could come up from the territory seat. He told me this over dinner at his big house, carving the meat, not looking at me. He said it the way you would mention the price of grain. And I sat there and I felt that door deep inside me closing again, and this time it felt like it would close for good. That was the night I decided to run. It was a small enough plan. The stage came through Ledger Creek twice a month, going down to the railhead. The next one was in 9 days. I had a little money I had hidden, not much, enough for the fare and a few weeks after. I would get on it some morning before the town was up and I would go, and I would be a stranger somewhere new and I would start over with nothing, which was more than I had now, because at least it would be mine. I did not tell Eli. I want to be honest about that. I did not tell him because I was afraid of two things. I was afraid he would try to stop me, and I was more afraid that he would not, that he would just nod flat the way he did and let me go, and I would never know if the thing I felt by his fire was a thing he felt too, or just a lost girl's foolishness. So I said nothing. I went up the trail one last time 2 days before the stage, and we sat by the creek, and the aspens had gone gold and were dropping their leaves into the water, and I watched them spin away downstream, and I memorized his face without telling him why. He knew something was wrong. He kept looking at me. At the end he said, "You have got a faraway look." And I said, "It is just the season turning." And he let it go, but I saw he did not believe me. When I left him that day, I had to make myself not look back. I knew if I looked back I would not be able to do it. What I did not know, what I only found out later, was this. Pyle was not a fool. He had eyes everywhere in that valley, that was how he held it. And somebody had told him that the debt girl from back east had been seen, more than once up the creek trail, with the wild man from the high country. And Pyle did not like to be made a fool of. And Pyle had heard, the way men like that always hear, that I had quietly asked the freight clerk about the schedule of the stage. So while I was lying awake the night before, counting my little money and my courage, Pyle was making a plan of his own. And so, it turned out, was Eli, though I did not learn the why of that until everything was nearly over. The morning of the stage I got up in the dark. I dressed quiet. I took my one trunk and my hidden money and I went down the boarding house stairs holding my breath at every creak. The street was empty and gray and cold, frost on everything, the mountains just starting to catch the first light up high. The stage was at the depot, the driver hitching the team, his breath smoking. A few other passengers stamping their feet. I walked toward it fast, my heart going like a hammer, telling myself, do not look back, just get on, just go. I was almost there. I had my hand out to the rail of the coach. And that was when I heard the horses, more than one, coming up the street behind me fast. I turned around because you cannot help turning around. And there was Pyle on a tall bay horse, with 3 of his men behind him, and the look on his face was not the polite smiling look he wore at dinner. This was the face under that one, hard and flat and certain. He came right up close and looked down at me from the horse, at me and my trunk and the stagecoach, and he understood all of it in a second, and he smiled, but it was a bad smile. He said, "Going somewhere." I could not speak. The other passengers had gone still. The driver had stopped his hitching. The whole gray street had gone quiet, the way a place goes quiet when it senses trouble and wants no part of it. Pyle got down off his horse. He was not a big man, but he carried himself big. He came and stood over me and he said, low so only I could mostly hear, "You signed nothing yet, but your father did, and his name is your name now. And a debt does not get to climb on a coach and ride away from the man it is owed to." He said, "Get the trunk down. We are going home." And here is the thing I am most ashamed of, and the thing I have made my peace with. I almost did it. My hand started to move toward the trunk, because that was the whole shape of my life up to that morning. You owe, you pay, you do as you are told, you close the door inside yourself and you live in the rooms that are left. I had run on a thimble of courage, and the courage was gone, and there was Pyle and his 3 men and a whole town that would not look at me, and I almost just picked up my trunk and went. And then a voice said, "She is not going anywhere with you." I knew the voice before I turned. Of course I did. Eli came up the street on foot, leading his mule, like he had walked down off the mountain in the night, which I learned later he had. He had his rifle, but it was slung on his back, not in his hands, and he walked right up into the middle of it all slow and easy, like he was strolling up to his own fire. He stopped a few feet from Pyle. He was taller, he was broader, and he was calm in a way that made Pyle's men shift in their saddles. Pyle looked him up and down, the skins, the beard, the weather on him, and Pyle laughed. He said, "This is the wild man. This is what you have been climbing up the creek for." He looked at me when he said it to shame me, and the town heard it, and I felt my face go hot. But Eli did not look ashamed for me. He looked at Pyle and he said, "You keep saying she owes you. How much?" Pyle named the figure. It was a cruel figure. It was more money than a man like Eli would see in 10 years of trapping, and Pyle named it loud so the street would hear it and understand that I was bought and paid for. And Eli reached inside his coat, and he took out a poke, a leather bag fat and heavy, and he held it out and he said, "Then take it, every cent and more. I have been 8 years up that mountain with nothing to spend it on. Take your money, Pyle, the debt is paid." You could have heard a pin drop in the snow. I found out later where it came from. There was gold in those mountains, not much, but a patient man working alone for years finds a little here and a little there, and Eli was the most patient man God ever made, and he had never had one reason in the world to spend $1 of it, until that morning. He had heard, the same as Pyle, that I had asked about the stage. And while I was deciding to run from everything, he had decided to come down and make sure that whatever I ran to it free, and not chased, and not owned. He had not even known if I would take him. He told me much later that he had figured I would get on that coach and ride away and he would never see me again, and that this was all right, so long as I went free. That is the kind of man he was. He did the right thing without needing it to come back to him. Pyle looked at that bag of gold and you could see the war in his face. Because it was the money was the thing, except it had never really been only the money had it. It had been the having. It had been the owning. A man like Pyle does not want a debt paid. He wants you to owe him forever. And here was this mountain man offering to settle the account in full and take the one thing Pyle could not stand to lose, which was his hold over a frightened girl. Pyle's hand moved toward his coat, and Eli, who had not touched his rifle this whole time, just looked at him. He did not reach for the gun. He just looked with those pale eyes and he said, "Quiet, you do not want to do that. Not over money you are being offered. Not in front of this whole town. Think." And Pyle thought. You could watch him think. And the 3 men behind him, they were thinking too, and what they were thinking was that there was no profit and a lot of risk in drawing on a man like that over a girl, in front of witnesses in the cold gray morning. One of them took his hand off his rifle. Then the next. And Pyle saw it, saw his own men deciding it was not worth it, and a man like Pyle is only ever as strong as the men behind him. He took the gold. He had to. He snatched it like it shamed him, and it did. He got back on his bay horse. He looked at me one last time, and there was hate in it, but it was small now. It was a beaten kind of hate, and he turned the horse and rode off up the street with his men, and that was the last I ever saw of Garrett Pyle. And then it was just Eli and me in the middle of the street, with the whole town watching from doorways and windows, and the stage waiting, and the mountains catching the full morning sun now, gone gold and white above us. He came over to me, slow. He looked at the coach and my trunk and me, and I could see he was bracing himself, because he had paid the debt to set me free, and free meant free, and that included free to get on that coach and ride away from him too. He had told himself that was all right. I could see him telling himself that, right there, getting ready to step back and let me go. And before I could say one word, before I could do the thing I had been about to do, which was reach for him, He straightened up to his full height, and he looked at me, and his voice was not quiet now. He said it so the whole street could hear it. He said, "You are mine now." And then softer just for me, he said the rest of it. He said, "Not bought, not owed, not the way he meant it. Mine because I am yours if you will have me, and I will spend whatever is left of my life proving I meant it. But I am not letting you climb on that coach thinking nobody in this world wanted you for yourself. Somebody does. I do. You are mine now, and I am yours, and that is the only debt I ever want to carry." I have been told since that it was the most romantic thing the town of Ledger Creek ever saw. People talked about it for years. The wild man from the mountain and the debt girl in the gray dawn. But I will tell you, in the moment, it was not pretty. I was crying so hard I could not see him. I dropped the bag with my little hidden money in it right in the mud. And I did not get on that coach. I left my trunk sitting there, and I walked into that big, rough mountain man, and put my face in his coat that smelled of wood smoke and pine, and I stayed. The driver, bless him, waited a minute, and then he saw how it was, and he just shook his head and climbed up and drove the empty seat away down the valley. We married that spring, not the spring Pyle had planned, our own. The church bell that did not ring true rang for us anyway, and it sounded fine to me. We lived up in the high country in the cabin he built bigger to hold the both of us and then the children when they came. The mountains never did get tame. He was right about that. They never forgive being underestimated. But they took us in and they kept us for 41 winters until the one that took him. So that is the story. That is the true one. And when my grandchildren ask me, "Were you scared?" I say yes because I was. But here is what I have learned to say after. I say, I was scared, but I had stopped being owned. A man down in that valley had spent my whole life teaching me I was a thing to be paid for. And a man up on that mountain spent the rest of it teaching me I was not. The difference between those two men was just one word, said in the cold in front of everybody, by a man who had nothing to gain by it. He said I was his, and he was the only person who ever said it and meant that I was free.